Hey friends, Chubby Meeple back with another video for you. Today we're going to take a look at Wormholes, published by Alderac Entertainment Group, better known as AEG. This is from designer Peter McPherson and features art by Caring Wong. And this game it's a pick up and deliver game for 1 to 5 players that plays in about 40 to 45 minutes. We'll be hitting retail later this year, the July-August timeframe, probably around Gen Con if I had to guess. But let's jump to the table. I'll give you a quick overview of how the game plays and we'll check it out together. Purposes of this video, I've set up the board for a 1 to 3 player game, and I have 3 components that are out for 3 players. But for the purposes of keeping camera clutter and all of that down, I've got 1 player's components on camera, our yellow player. I have the red and blue players off camera, as well as the victory point tokens. So there are victory point tokens that come in values of 1 or 5. I've got them in stacks off camera as well, and may bring those in as we go through the game. Now, the purpose of this video is just going to be a quick overview of the game, covering basic concepts. We're not going to do a lot of turn order, actually playing the game on camera, but just wanted to give you an idea of basic concepts of the game. The object of Wormholes is to score the most victory points. In order to score victory points, players are going to be moving around the board with their spaceships, constructing wormholes, traveling through those wormholes, as well as the wormholes of other players, to get to the planets across the board and deliver passengers to those planets. Basically drop those passengers off where they would like to go. You're going to score victory points for the passengers that you drop off. You're going to score points for players using your wormholes. You'll get points for traveling to a number of different planets, and you'll also score victory points with the victory point tokens. You'll pick those up as things go on. Now, on every player's first turn, when you're setting up the game, each player is going to be given their components in their colors. You're going to have a passenger pickup tile, 3 energy tokens to indicate the energy that you've spent. Each player will have a spaceship that will mark their place on the map, on the game board. They'll also be given a stack of wormhole tokens that are numbered 1 to 5, and there are 2 of each number. So you're essentially going to have a stack of 10 wormholes, 2 1s, 2 2s, all the way down to 2 5s. Those wormholes are going to get placed in numerical order, and wormholes don't become active until the matching numbered pair are placed on the board. So I could have a 1 wormhole on the board, but I can't do anything with it until I place the other 1 wormhole. They will then become active, and I'll be able to travel between those wormholes. And I'll talk about that in a second here. On a player's first turn, well, also part of setup, you're also going to determine a first player either randomly. The rule book says it's the first player to come and walk through a doorway. You can randomly determine it. We just made the yellow player the first player for the purposes of this video. The first player is going to get dealt 1 passenger card from the passenger deck. Players 2 and 3 are each dealt 2 cards each. And in a 4 or 5 player game, players 4 and 5 would each get 3 cards. In a 4 to 5 player game, there are also more cards in the deck, and there are 2 more tiles that are out to form the game board, giving you a bigger space, adding 2 planets to the board, 2 additional planets to the board, and of course more cards for to kind of keep the gameplay about the same length. In a 2 to 3 player game, our map contains 8 different planets. In a 4 to 5 player game, you'll have a total of 10 planets to deliver your passengers to. We'll take a look at a passenger card. A passenger card is simply going to depict a planet that is located somewhere on the board. In the case of this planet is located right over here. So the icons, or not the icons, but the art on the cards will match. So this indicates that this particular passenger is trying to travel from this planet. Now, at the start of the game, every player is going to start adjacent to the space station. So our space station is here on this particular setup. And essentially, the cards that you get dealt are essentially your first passengers that you're picking up from the space station and sending out, trying to get them to the planets they would like to go to. So our yellow player has picked up a passenger at the space station, trying to get to this blue planet over here. On our yellow player's first turn, and on every player's first turn, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to take their first wormhole. In this case, the number 1, and it's an inactive. The active side looks like this. It's a much brighter color. It's got more of the yellow color to it than just the black inactive side. Our yellow player will place that wormhole in any space adjacent to the space station to start their turn, and they will place their spaceship in that location. From that point forward, they will be able to take their turn as normal. A normal turn consists of spending energy tokens to move your ship. You have 3 energy tokens you can spend to move your ship around the board. You do not have to spend all 3 energy tokens on your turn. However, unused energy doesn't carry over to the next round. So there may not be a whole lot of cases where it doesn't make sense to not use all 3. But essentially, spending 1 energy token allows you to move your ship 1 space on the board. So again, you're moving across into adjacent hex spaces. So I couldn't move straight line this way for one move. That would actually cost me a second energy going here and then there. So we'll say we did that. So we moved one here, we moved two there. We'll spend our third energy to move over here next to that planet. Now I've spent all my energy tokens, so my ship can no longer move. However, there are free actions that can be taken. The first free action you can take is deliver passengers. If your ship is adjacent to a planet where you have passengers in your hand, the planet you're adjacent to matches a card in your hand, essentially, you can deliver that passenger. So our yellow player would deliver this passenger, simply putting it in a scoring pile. In this case, I'm leaving it face up on camera. A lot of times they'll be face down, so your opponents don't know exactly which planets you've traveled to, but we'll leave it face up for the purposes of this video. Another free action that I can take, and I can do this once per token, or once per turn, is I can flip my Pick Up Passengers token. When I flip up that Pick Up Passengers, I can draw up to my hand size of 4 cards. My max hand size is 4. In this case, I have nothing left in my hand because I was dealt 1 card. I just delivered that particular passenger. So we'll draw 4 cards off the top of the passenger deck. And after drawing those 4 cards, the first thing we have to do is look at them and make sure that none of the planets on these new cards match the planet that I'm adjacent to. So if I had drawn any more passengers that matched this planet, then I wouldn't be able to keep them. Those cards would get discarded. So these become my new 4 cards. Having spent all of my actions and done my one turn, my one time per turn pickup of passengers, my turn is over. So we'll move to our red player here. Our red player is going to take a peek at their cards. These are the 2 cards we dealt the red player. The red player starts their first turn. Since it's their first turn, they're going to place their wormhole, again, adjacent to their first wormhole, adjacent to the space station, placing their spaceship on there. They will spend 3 tokens to move. So we'll spend our 3 energy tokens. We're going to move just up this direction. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. Now we're adjacent to this planet. However, neither of our cards are of that planet. However, I can take my free action to pick up passengers, just like the yellow player did at the blue planet. I could choose to pick up passengers at this planet. Now let's say our red player does not like these 2 planets they were given. Before they pick up passengers, they could choose to discard these cards. Any cards that get discarded at any time through the course of the game get discarded face up, and it's best to sort them by planet because you can pick up any number of cards per planet later on in the game if you're picking up passengers from the space station. Our red player would then draw up to their max hand size, in this case of 4. Since they discarded the 2 cards that were in hand, they will draw 4 cards. Double check that none of those cards match the planet they're adjacent to. In this case, again, they do not. And that becomes their new hand, their new targeted planets, if you will, for where the passengers would like to be delivered to. Our blue player will start their turn. We're going to peek at their cards to see where they're trying to head. So we have these 2 planets on the board, which happen to be way over here. So our blue player is going to place their wormhole here, spend their 3 tokens to move 1, 2, well, starting here, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to stop here. Now, our blue player is not adjacent to a planet, so they do not have the capability of picking up or dropping off passengers because they're not adjacent to a planet. However, another free action you can take on your turn, in addition to picking up and dropping off passengers, is to build a wormhole. When you build a wormhole, you take the next wormhole in your stack. In the case of all of our players at this point, it would be their other number 1. That wormhole can then be built in any open space, either on the space where your ship is or adjacent to where your ship is. However, the wormhole can never be built on any of the dark background spaces, so you can't place your wormhole on asteroids, planets, the sun, on the space station, and it can also not be placed on any of the features on the board. So any of these wild wormholes, any of the nebula spaces, any of the Photon Cannon. They're also maybe a black hole, depending on the tiles that are out that get randomized. But let's say our blue player wants to build this wormhole. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense right now, but we're going to build this wormhole right here adjacent to this blue planet. Now our blue player has just placed their second number 1. So what we're due to indicate these wormholes are active now is we simply flip these wormhole tokens to their active side. So you see they're more blue, they're not black. So basically the wormhole's been activated, they're turned on. And at the bottom of the number, there are arrow icons that will point at each other, so you have a general idea of the direction. So if I use this number 1 wormhole, looking at this arrow, I know the other number 1 is in this direction on the board. Right now, it's pretty obvious they're close together, but as more and more wormholes start to come out, the board can become cluttered with them, and they become further away. Once a blue player has, 1, 2, 3, and 4 wormholes on the board, it becomes more important to figure out where they are to get there. So our blue players ended their turn. However, they built their wormhole adjacent to this planet. Since they were the first player to build adjacent to the planet, they get to take the first token off of the exploration stack. The exploration stack will score victory points for players as they build wormholes next to planets. Our blue player was the first one to build, so they get to take the first token off the stack, scoring them 1 victory point. The tokens in this stack are worth 1 or 3 victory points, depending on how late in the game you build wormholes. The first few are worth 1 victory point. Once you get down to tiles 5, 6, 7, kind of that area, they become 3 victory point tokens. So we're going to put that token in our blue player's area and score them a victory point because they were the first to build next to that planet. Now, our red and yellow players can also build wormholes next to this planet. However, they will not get exploration tokens for doing so. It's only the first player that gets there. And it's important to build wormholes next to planets, not only for the purposes of delivering passengers to those planets and dropping passengers off where they would like to go much quicker than moving 3 spaces at a time, but it's also an end-game mechanism. As players build wormholes next to planets, they take the top token of the deck, and this exploration stack will start to dwindle. Eventually, we're going to have 1 wormhole next to every planet. So in this case, of a 2 to 3 player game, we're going to have 1 wormhole next to each of the 8 planets. When that happens, we are going to see this token revealed. This token is referred to as the Planets Connected token. This indicates that all of the planets have been connected. Essentially, the solar system has been completely connected with one another via wormholes. And players are going to finish out the current round at their end. Once play gets back to the first player, we're going to remove the Planets Connected token, and we're going to have this token that has a 3 with a little circle in it. This means you're going to play another round. So we're playing another round going around the table clockwise, just like normal. Once it gets back to the first player again, we're going to remove that token. Now we have 2 rounds left, so we're going to play another round. When it gets back to the first player, we remove the number 2. We have number 1 with the circle on it. So we will play 1 more round. After the player to the right of the first player has taken their turn, the game will end and you'll total up victory points. I've jumped ahead in the game and put some wormholes on the board and effectively have got to an end game condition so that I can talk a little bit about how the wormholes work, what they mean for you, some other spaces on the board that may grant you free actions, and then also we'll discuss final scoring. So we've talked about moving around the board, spending your energy tokens, 1 energy to move 1 space. Another way that you can move around the board is by the use of wormholes, whether they're your wormhole or another player's wormhole. So for example, our yellow ship over here is next to their own wormhole. There's a wormhole numbered 3, and you'll see the arrow points indicating that the number 3 wormhole is in this direction. Looking in that direction, we find the other number 3 yellow wormhole down here. So our yellow player can spend 1 of their energy tokens to move to their 3 wormhole. Then for free, they can move to their other number 3 wormhole and basically jump across the board at no cost. This would allow them to maybe deliver some passengers to this planet, jump into their wormhole, jump across the board, and then deliver some more passengers to this planet. While you can only pick up passengers once per turn, you can deliver passengers any number of turns as long as you have energy and movement that allow you to do it. Our player could then decide that they wanted to go back to the space station, and they could spend an energy to move to our red player's number 2 wormhole that is here, and then for free, jump to our red player's number 2 that is adjacent to the space station. Now, while that movement didn't cost them any energy to jump from this space back to the space station, it does, however, grant a victory point token to our red player. So our red player would simply take a victory point token and add it to their supply because the yellow player used their wormhole. Anytime you use another player's wormhole, that player gets a victory point token. Obviously, using your own wormhole doesn't grant you any victory point tokens, but it keeps you from granting victory points to the other player. So the ideal use of the wormholes is to use your own as much as you can and to place your wormholes in advantageous spaces around the board so that other players would be tempted to use them as well and get around the board quickly, but also grant you victory points as they're moving around and dropping off passengers. Now, looking around the board, there are different features of the board that allow you to alter the way you move and also move for free in some spaces, or some cases. The first thing we have is the wild wormholes. In this board setup, you'll see a wild wormhole here with a 3 next to it, and then there's one here with a 4. Those wild wormholes allow you to move into that space. So you'll move into that space spending energy like normal. However, once you're on that space, you can then use that wild wormhole to travel to your own wormhole that matches that number. So for example, our blue player could move into this 3 space and then use that 3 wild wormhole for free, not spending any energy, to travel to either of their 3s. So they have a 3 here, and then their other 3 is over here by this blue planet. So they can spend 2 energy to get here, and then spend no energy, but move either here or here, delivering passengers to those various planets as they see fit. They could also, alternatively, let's say they flew over here, dropped off some passengers at this planet, they could then use this wormhole again to either jump across the board, or they could jump from their number 3 wormhole to this wild wormhole space if there was something near that wormhole they wanted to use. The same is true of the 4, just you're traveling to your own 4 wormhole, active 4 wormhole, or using an active 4 to travel to that wild 4. It is important to note you can only travel to your matching wormhole. You can't use the wild 3. Our yellow player, for example, couldn't use the wild 3 to travel to the blue or red player's 3. You can only travel to your own using those wild wormholes. The next feature on the board are the nebula. That is these 3 spaces on the board. There are other configurations of them on other tiles as well. What the nebula allow you to do is they allow you to move your token, spend an energy to move into the nebula. So our red player could spend 1 energy to move off of their 3 wormhole into the nebula space. They then get to exit the nebula at any space that's adjacent to the nebula, free of energy, without spending energy, basically a free movement. So our red player could use the nebula to travel here and exit for free and still have 2 energy left. So again, they could spend 2 energy. They spend 1 energy to move into the 3 and zap to either their 3 there or their other 3, which is over here. Or they could spend another energy, jump to our blue player's number 1, and then use that wormhole to warp back to the space station, again granting the blue player 1 victory point. So that's how the nebula work. They just basically grant you further movement for the spending of 1 energy. The orbit. Orbit is a dotted line around, in this case, just the space station. However, there are cases where sometimes this, in the way the tiles are set up, the other side of this tile has another version of this pink planet that is larger and also has a dotted line around it. Those are referred to as the orbit. What the orbit allows you to do is it allows you to spend 1 energy and move to any space on that orbit for that 1 energy, because you're essentially using the gravitational force of that celestial body to move around it and spending less energy to do so. Another space on the board that allows you to have some free movement is the Photon Cannon. This space here is referred to as the Photon Cannon, and once you've moved into that space, the Photon Cannon, again without spending energy, allows you to move in any direction. So I could move this way, that way, this way, that way, or any of these. I can move any number of spaces in a straight line without basically ignoring obstacles. So I could use my Photon Cannon if I'm the yellow player. I could shoot to here, for example, ignoring this asteroid and this wormhole. I could go further if I wanted to. Obviously can't go off the board, but maybe I needed to use the Photon Cannon to get here so that I could deliver some passengers, for example. So that's what the Photon Cannon does. It allows you, for no movement, just shoot across the board without using wormholes, so you're not giving any extra points to players, and you're allowed to get across the board quickly that way, again without spending energy, and still being able to ignore obstacles like the wormholes allow you to do. And then the final map feature that you see is the black hole. The black hole is it's not on the board in our current setup. However, in some setups, you'll have a black hole space that looks like this icon here at the bottom. What the black hole does, when you move into the black hole space, you immediately discard the top card of the passenger deck, and you move your spaceship to any space adjacent to that planet, if possible. And then you're free to move about your turn from that point forward. So you can deliver passengers to there. You can spend energy to continue movement. But the black hole basically sucks you into it and drops you off next to a planet. And those are the different features that are on the board and how you move around the board. Let's take a look at how final scoring works. Final scoring in Wormholes is done by, first, you get 2 points for every passenger you delivered. So let's say these cards that are face up on the table right now are the passengers that our yellow player delivered through the course of the game. So they would score 2 points for each of these cards, and there's a little victory point reminder of each card has the 2 victory point symbol on it. So every card's worth 2 points. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 passengers were delivered for a total of 24 points for that regard. They will also score points as players have used their wormholes throughout the course of the game. They'll have victory point tokens in their supply. So in this case, they've got 8 victory points. This indicates that through the course of the game, their wormholes were used 8 times by other players. So they're at 24 plus the 8, that's 32 points. They will then score points for the exploration tokens they have, either 1 or 3 victory points. So these are tokens, again, that they acquire by being the first player to build a wormhole next to a planet. So in this case, they've picked up another 6 points, which takes them to 38 points. So they're at a total of 38 points. The final way that you score points is by diversifying the planets that you drop passengers off. So in this case, we've got our passengers divided by the planets that they've been dropped off, and there's a total of 6 planets. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different planets. The first 5 planets that were visited, or 5 planets, you can take 5 of those planets out. So let's say we remove these 5. Don't score any extra bonus points. However, any extra planets that are remaining after you take 5 of them away, any additional planets past those 5 give you 3 bonus points. So this particular planet would be worth 3 bonus points to the player because it is the 6th planet they visited. In a 2 to 3 player game, there are 8 planets on the board. The first 5 aren't worth anything. Planets 6, 7, and 8 could be 3 points each, so you could potentially score an additional 9 victory points if you were able to visit all 8 planets. You total those points up. In this case, we'd have a total of 41 points. The player with the most points wins. If there's a tie, the player who delivered the most or dropped off the most passengers is the winner. If that number is tied, then the player who has the most victory point tokens in their supply is the winner because whoever has the most victory points in victory point tokens would be the winner because their wormholes were used more, kind of indicating they strategically placed them better than the other players. And if that number's tied, the tied players simply share the victory. And that is everything you need to know to play Wormholes by AEG. So that's Wormholes by AEG. This is a fun little game. I would consider this to be an entry-level game. Definitely. It's a light rule set, very quick play time. There's not a lot of complexity to it. It is very rules independent, so younger kids shouldn't have any trouble picking up on this game either, just because there's nothing for them to read. You have the one rules reference card that talks about your free actions, but you could always help younger kids out with that. I really enjoy the puzzliness of the game. I definitely consider this more of a puzzle game than I do a strategy game because there's no resource management. I mean, you have your 3 energy, but there's not multiple different resources to figure out how to manage. It's literally more a puzzle of where do I place my wormholes, so that I can jump across the board quickly, and also put them in a place that other players are going to be tempted to use them and score me those extra victory points. One of the games I played, we had a player that placed one of their wormholes next to the Photon Cannon space because it made sense. Players wanted to jump to that Photon Cannon because that thing can shoot you across the board without spending an energy, and you can get to the other side of the board really fast, drop off some passengers and score some quick points. Of course, you want to make sure you've got a wormhole out at that distant planet, otherwise it's going to take you a while to get back. But we had a player that placed a wormhole next to that so that when players would be tempted to use his wormhole to jump next to the Photon Cannon, spend energy, get the Photon Cannon, and then blast across the board. And so players were doing that. And then we caught on that, hey, if I use his wormhole real quick, I'll give him a victory point, but then I can drop one of my own, and then I can use my own wormhole to get near the Photon Cannon. But it's just fun to do those kinds of things. I love the variability of this game. I mean, obviously there's a lot of randomness to it in terms of the cards you're going to draw. So your typical, if you like having perfect information to be able to plan and arrange your moves based on that. It might not be a game that you're gonna love terribly or too much, just because the card draw's random, so the areas you need to get to deliver those, to drop off those passengers. Now you do have the capability when you're picking up cards, you do have the ability to discard some. So if there's a planet on the other side of the board and you just can't get there now, or you don't want to take the time to do it because you want the favor of finding those cards and getting through, getting to closer planets, you can discard some cards to the space station docks, that face up discard pile, and then draw extra cards that way. So you can cycle that way. There's a little bit of way to mitigate that, but overall it's random. The nice thing about it, though, is as the wormholes start to pop up on the board, it doesn't take a whole lot of moves to get from one side of the board to the other. Yeah, you may be giving an opponent a victory point because you used their wormhole to jump from the space station to a planet on the other side of the board, but if you're dropping off passengers to the planet you just went to using that wormhole, you gave them a point, but every passenger you drop off is worth 2, and you can drop off multiple passengers at once at that planet. If you've got 3 passengers that all match that planet, you can drop all 3 for that that free drop-off passenger action. So yeah, I gave you a point because I used your wormhole, but I just scored 6 points by dropping off 3 passengers. So it's usually worth the trade-off there. I did notice, I wanted to note on here, I did notice a goof that I made when doing the video when I had set up the board and I moved, I kind of advanced flash forward and I'd thrown some wormholes on the board and set some things up to discuss the areas on the board. One of the things I did, I didn't play the game, I just randomly threw some things on the board to get them out there. One of the things when you're building wormholes, you can put them in any open space where there's not already a wormhole, it's not a board feature, anything like that. However, what you can't do is you can't have 2 of your own wormhole next to the same planet, with the exception of the space station, and in the case if you're using the big pink planet that has an orbit around it, you can also have multiple of your space stations around that planet. However, the normal planets, each player can only have one of their space stations next. One of their space stations next to it. And if you go back and look at the video, in the upper left-hand corner, there are 2 yellow wormholes next to that upper left-hand planet, which is something you can't do. And by the time I noticed it while I was editing, I'd already torn everything down and didn't, if I go back and reshoot, I pretty much have to reshoot everything because the board state's different and everything. But anyway, just wanted to point that out so that to cut down any confusion there. You cannot build 2 or more of your own wormholes next to a single planet. You can only have 1 of yours there. So, but I definitely recommend checking this game out. Like I said, it's coming out later this year, July, August kind of time frame. I would suspect it'll be a Gen Con release if it doesn't come out a little bit sooner. But definitely check this one out. It's a super fun game, a lot of fun to just kind of sit down, not really have to think a whole lot, not really heavy thinky game, but 40-45 minutes. It's a really good entry-level game if you've got a friend that's new to the hobby, you want to show them something that's got a little bit more weight to it than like a Ticket to Ride does, but you don't want to overwhelm them with rules. This is definitely one to do. Or if you want to play it with with family, you've got younger kids, definitely get this one on the table. It's a good one. So that's Wormholes by AEG, and until next time, keep gaming, friends.